Welcome back to another edition of the GPFans Stewards Room podcast, where once again we're breaking down all of the racing action from a thrilling Sunday in Formula One. And my goodness, what a tense Sunday it was in Austin, Texas. The circuit of the Americas providing so much excitement over the last 3 days. And here to break it all down with me is, well, firstly, Ian Parks, the GPFans Global Editor-in-Chief, who is not only living up to his name and tagline, but also has been diligently working into the early hours of the UK time because he has been in Austin, Texas, and still is at the moment. Ian, how are you doing, mate?
I'm all right, actually. I'm not feeling too bad. I'm sleep-wise, not great. Jet lag has definitely played a part in this, but yeah, you get through it, and it's been an absolutely amazing weekend, I've got to say. It's good to be back on the road again, and good to be covering what felt like a proper normal paddock in Formula One. I don't know if you saw it yesterday, just very quickly. I did a tweet and it compared the Silverstone paddock from 3.5 months ago to the Austin paddock of yesterday. The Silverstone paddock was bereft of anybody. The Austin paddock was just heaving. All that in 3.5 months. F1 pulled off a blinder. Great to be back.
The Americans are going to do it bigger and better than anybody else. When you've got Shaquille O'Neal taking up the space of about 6 people down there in the paddock, it's going to feel very busy indeed. Just quickly before we bring in everybody else, Ian, how many Bud Lights did you sip on over the weekend? Because, you know, if you're there, you've got to have the awful American light beer.
Oh no, mate! This is Austin. This is the home of proper beer. This is where they know how to brew decent stuff. I tell you, they do some cracking IPAs. Really good. Yeah, you got to get yourself over here.
Well, once the company starts paying out all the bills, we can start making our way over. Sam Hall, Deputy Editor of GP Fans, who I'm sure was having a couple of IPAs as Sunday went on and probably shaking with the hands a bit as well as the tension got going on Sunday's race day.
I would love to say I was having some IPAs, but I don't think it would have helped the race at all. I mean, there was a few of these went down, but, you know, a few monsters. But, you know, it was a great race, as Ian says, a brilliant race. And, yeah, I can't wait to be diving into that.
And you and Gail as well, F1 correspondent for GP Fans. Austin may be the home of the microbrewing and the cold IPAs, but surely where you are in Wales, you've got Tiny Rebel Brewing Company and the beer is still flowing down there as well. How was your Sunday, mate?
It was good. I was on the coffee, though, and the old school stay awake tactics. But really, we didn't need any stay awake tactics because the race was just absolutely gripping, got the adrenaline flowing. So, yeah, as Sam said, can't wait to dive into it.
Let's talk about Sunday's race then. Let's talk about the atmosphere around this circuit, though, Ian, quickly. But let's get the lowdown on how it was feeling. You mentioned it felt like a normal F1 paddock. The stands were absolutely packed. The atmosphere, it seemed from the television experience, was absolutely fantastic. A real zip and energy about it. Almost similar to Zandvoort, do you feel? Or was it perhaps even a little bit better in America?
Well, you got to think that Zandvoort was predominantly Max-centric. This time around, this was F1-centric. This was so many different, all the fans wearing different garb, supporting different teams. There was no real focus on one particular team or one particular hero driver for them. It was the love of F1. And I think after this weekend, I think we can finally say F1 has cracked America. It's been a long time coming. Definitely a long time coming, but finally it's done it. And I was speaking to, just very quickly, I'll relate a tale. I had a chat with Bobby Epstein, who's the USGP CEO, the Circuit of America CEO, and spoke to him after the event last night. He was absolutely over the moon with what had happened. And I asked him about, was this specifically down to the Netflix effect? Would we have had nearly 400,000 fans across the weekend, a Grand Prix attendance, a three-day attendance Grand Prix record, by the way? Would we have had that attendance if it hadn't have been for Netflix? And obviously the Drive to Survive series. And he came out with a great quote, and he basically said that Netflix was the rocket fuel to the fire that was already there. So basically, Drive to Survive has ignited finally the American passion for F1. And F1, thankfully, delivered an event worthy of all those fans that turned up in the end.
I was going to say, it's very lucky that we had all those fans and all of that excitement. And then, Sam Hall, we have an absolutely engrossing race because everybody's waiting for turn one, Verstappen and Hamilton going down to that first corner. There was no collision, thankfully. And then we got a really tense tactical battle with the teams on the pit wall trying to make the right changes at the right time, and then an all-out thrilling final 10, 15 laps or so of Hamilton chasing down Max Verstappen. It was the perfect spectacle with a little bit of everything to give the Americans.
Oh, if it had been a dreadful race, a really boring race, I mean, it would have almost taken away that rocket fuel that Ian's just been talking about. It needed to be an absolute thriller, and fair enough, it wasn't a seat of your pants, you can watch this 1,000 times again kind of race. It was one of those tactical battles that when you're watching it unfold, like when you're watching a murder mystery film for the first time, you see the battle unfolding, you see, oh, we've got this bit here, and at the end of it, it all pulls together, and the whole thing is just this brilliant package. I absolutely loved it. I can't speak highly enough of it, but I will say, though, we got them going wheel to wheel into turn ones we wanted. That was aided slightly by the removal of some sausage curbs on the exit of turn one prior to the race. That was because of two drivers across the weekend breaking their backs, essentially. They've got fractures in their vertebrae, Abby Eaton, and they're in the W Series, and there was a USF4 driver as well. So there's question marks over whether these baguette curbs are needed at other races or whether they are just dangerous. I mean, we saw a couple of years ago in F3, you will remember the driver that went flying up at Monza. So we've got this aspect as well, which, I mean, that's a different topic entirely there.
Yeah, it was Alex Peroni in Monza, and he had Terashenko in Spa as well. So it is a different topic entirely. But as you said, those being taken away, I mean, even we saw the sausage curb influence in Monza, Lewis and Max side by side this year as well. With those gone, we were able to see them go side by side cleanly. It was a good battle. And then obviously throughout the first stint, then Max was able to stick on the back of Hamilton on those mediums and eventually pull off an undercut that would lead to him winning the race. And as Sam said, it was one of those races that was just absolutely a G-seat all the way through because nobody knew what those tyres were going to do at the end of the race. Really thoroughly enjoyable. And then looking through the rest of the field, plenty of battles as well. We know that the Circuit of the Americas is a good racing track. We've seen it since it came onto the calendar in 2012. And as Ian and Sam rightly said, now that they've got that profile in the US and they had that audience, it was great that it was able to live up to its name in a way, as the drivers have always said that they like turning up to this circuit. The fact that they managed to live up to that this weekend was a real positive.
And
Well, I'm just going.
Go on.
I was just going to say, I'm just going to interject here and ask a question of everyone. Would we be crowing this much about that race if it had only been a one-stopper? There's a point. We've always talked about in F1 about, if we have two-stop races, it throws open strategy so much more. And that was the key thing yesterday. We had a two-stop race because the soft tyres were worth nothing at the end of the day. And then obviously they were forced into a two-stop strategy. And I think that really, really played into the hands of that whole event.
No, I totally agree. And the problem is when you've got a one-stop strategy, because of the way the tyre regulations work in qualifying, you never get a massive offset in terms of the pit window. So you'll never see drivers extending by 10, 12 laps to have the tyre delta at the end of the race, to have that massive charge, which is why, as everyone knows in this podcast, I really like refueling, because you never know what anyone's going to do with the fuel loads. So if you're going to have tyres that only do one-stop races, I think you've got to have refueling. But as we've seen plenty of times this season, to be fair, whether it be France, Spain, the US over the weekend, if you've got tyres that are just really, they could have one-stopped if they wanted to. If they really wanted to tweak it, they could have one-stopped. But they were just on the edge. They were forced into a two-stop, and it created a brilliant race, and it has done all season long. So, yeah, Ian's right. We wouldn't have had the same effect if it was a one-stop race.
For me, I mean, we saw drivers using the hard tyres. They never, ever use the hard tyres. They don't want to use them. So you see them maybe burn both sets sometimes in FP1 and go, well, that's them done. We've used those to learn the track, if you will, and now we're just going to use the softs and mediums to get us through. For me, this is a perfect lesson for Pirelli. bring tyres that are 1 or maybe even 2 steps softer to every single race. We don't want to see tyres that can go the distance if you really want. Yeah, it was brilliant with the intermediates and the way that it was made to work last time out in Turkey. But no, we want to see 2-stop races, or go the whole hog, have 3-stop races. But the same as with this, if you do it all the time, you can have too much of a good thing. So the occasional 1-stop is good, but yeah, 2 stops the way to go.
You're just getting greedy here, Sam. If you're asking for 3 stops and Ewan's want refueling back as well, I mean...
I'll raise you 4 stops in a minute. Go for it.
Let's just not bother with tyres at all. Let's have them running around on the rims and then replacing the rims as we go round if you want them that soft. I mean, the tyre problem actually, because Pirelli, of course, after Baku earlier on in the year, there was a lot of discussion about the ability for the tyres to be able to withstand Formula One racing at that sort of level in Azerbaijan. And in Pirelli's kind of credit, they have gone back and reassessed that this year, and they've kind of made good after what was a difficult start to the year with the tyres. I mean, there's just so many neat little stories of the bookend now at this point for Pirelli at the start of the season, the end of the season, the bookend of Hamilton and Max going wheel to wheel on Friday and then finishing up the race on Sunday almost wheel to wheel. There's so many little twisting narratives running all the way through this American Grand Prix. But I think you do have to give Pirelli the right shout out for bringing the right tyres this weekend and giving us the entertainment that we did have. I want to talk to you, Ian, about the opening corner and Max's rather vehement left-hand push to try and get Lewis as far over as possible. I really thought we were going to see contact at that point, just because Max seemed like he was not going to give up that first place without a fight. And it's only because that circuit is so wide going up the hill and going into that first left-hand corner that Hamilton wasn't completely pushed off the track.
For me, it's the best first corner in Formula One. I absolutely love it. This isn't me crowing, but if you stand at the bottom of that hill and you look up, you realise the incline that there is that goes up there. It's just fantastic. And to make it a sharp left-hander as well just really adds to it. It's not like some flowing thing or anything like that. Just an absolutely great first corner, as I say, best in F1 for me. And Lewis, for once this season, because he even admitted himself yesterday that his starts have been nowhere near to the level that he knows he's capable of. For once, he finally got that start. Max was the one that got a bit bogged down. So Lewis had the perfect line into that first corner. Yes, he was pushed right across. Yes, we did think there was going to be contact again, but for once, they just managed to hold themselves in position. And Lewis, going into that first corner, did what he had to do, as we've seen him do it before in the past with Nico Rosberg, twice famously, I remember, pushing him well wide. So far wide, in fact, that even Checo Perez thought he'd got a run on Max at one point, but I think Checo thought, "Oh, hold on, team game here, team game. If I overtake my teammate, that's not going to look good." So anyway, no, it was a great first corner in the end. It would have been brilliant if we'd seen some contact. Kind of what we want, don't we, a little bit? But at the end of the day, they played it nice, safe, clean for once. It was just the right amount of bravado from both sides going into that first corner, you could say.
Is it a case, do you think, guys, of a few weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, we might have seen an actual incident, but we're now, Austin was 6 races to go, now 5 races to go in the season. Both of these drivers know that mistakes that are going to take one or the other or both drivers out can be really costly in the championship, and they actually can't afford to be going so close to making contact, particularly at first corners in races.
I think that might go through Lewis's mind slightly more than Max. My only reasoning for that is because Lewis potentially has another engine penalty coming his way, so knows at some point he's highly likely to drop more points to Max. Max, we think, is probably fine to go to the end of the season without another engine penalty. So Lewis has more to lose, if you want to put it that way. But in the heat of the moment, running down to turn 1 or up to turn 1 in this case, did that go through his mind? Not a chance.
Let's talk about them Red Bull strategy, Ewan. And I mean, Toto said it, Christian Horner said it. Red Bull went hyper aggressive on the undercut and then avoiding the undercut as well. Was it genius timing, or was it the last ditch of a madman in Christian Horner, if you will, to cut it so finely between success and failure?
I think what played into their hands is what's been said a few times over the season, that it's easy to be in second. especially when you got Lewis and Max. I mean, Andrew Shovlin in his interview yesterday said that it's almost easier when it's Lewis and Max because for the most part, those two are going to come first and second in a Grand Prix. You can sort of take that as a given. As long as there's no other issues outside that, those two are going to be first and second. So the worst that was ever going to happen to Max by doing that strategy was he was going to finish second where he was anyway. It did give him the opportunity to get ahead of Hamilton. I would say the first pit stop wasn't as wildly aggressive as the second pit stop was, especially given he was ahead of Hamilton. The fact that they had that 3-second gap and wanted to cover that off was a bit of a surprise, I think, to people with him coming in that early, given the degradation that we'd seen throughout the race to that point. And then we sort of got to see a different side of Max, I think, during that final stint then. We've said how brilliantly fast he is all season, but the cleverness to sort of eke those tyres out towards the end and then start getting the perfect traction out of the hairpins onto the straights in those last 5 or 6 laps as Lewis was closing in. Really, really clever drive in the end from Max and great strategy from Red Bull. That's what you can do when you've got 2 cars in the top 3. And that's what you can do when you're not changing your engines every other race. So we've said it enough about Mercedes in the past. Now it's Red Bull's turn to have that little advantage with the 2 drivers at the top.
And Checo played his part, didn't he? And when they needed him to put his foot on the gas, Checo did ensure that Hamilton then had to come in as well for that stop around about lap 13, just to make sure, well, for Mercedes to try and keep track position or at least keep Hamilton on the heels of Max Verstappen after that first round of pit stops.
Yeah, it was a taste. Basically, it was a taste of a bit of medicine there for Mercedes, wasn't it? When you think about it, because how often have we seen that they have been the ones with that 2-on-1 pincer movement that they can cover off their rival. Obviously, this season it's been Max. We've seen that, as I say, many times. This time around, Red Bull finally pulled it off in qualifying. And obviously they managed to pull it off during the race as well. And they were able to play the clever tactical game. And as you say, Checo was there for them when they needed him to force Mercedes' hand. And it worked perfectly for them. Great. To be fair, it was a great weekend from Checo. Probably one of his most consistent weekends, I would suggest, that he's had. But he's most consistent this weekend he's had this season with Red Bull. And when you look at the gap and you think, blimey, 42 seconds adrift of the front 2. Where did that go? Well, obviously the front 2 were just in another league of their own. But in fairness to Checo, he was feeling unwell throughout the weekend, and he had no drinks bottle from lap 1. So in that heat, 30-degree heat, high humidity as well yesterday, that was some drive in the end, because that would have, as he pointed out, that really tested him physically. I think he said it was the most physical race he's ever had to endure of his career. So just, a really good performance from him. Thankfully, he's finally shown what he's capable of in that Red Bull now.
And let's not forget, if it wasn't for a slow stop in the first pit stop window, he could have been ahead of Lewis. Because they sort of half sacrificed him a little bit, put him onto a set of used mediums. We know how good the Red Bull were on those mediums at the start of the race yesterday. There was a slow stop. If he could have got out and got into that undercut window, it really would have put the pressure on Mercedes to get that pit stop right, and then it could have been a Red Bull 1-2 at least the first half of the race. It would have completely killed off any charge that Hamilton would have had at the end of the race. Now, obviously, with Perez with his drinks bottle and his illness, as Ian said, maybe he wouldn't have been able to stay ahead of Hamilton to finish second in the race, but it would have complicated things for Mercedes and, really sewn up that Red Bull victory way earlier on. So, as Ian said, a really good weekend. Almost got pole as well if it wasn't for a bit of rain at the final corner.
Sam, was there anything that Mercedes could have done this weekend to counteract that strategy from Red Bull? Will they be looking back at this? We've been critical a few times of some of the calls that Mercedes have made, but was this a weekend where it would be too harsh to be critical of the way they tried to compete with Red Bull on the pit wall?
I don't particularly think so. The first pit stop I did feel was a bit like in Turkey, where they were sort of in no man's land, really, because if they had stopped the lap after Verstappen stopped, they would have been able to minimize the loss. Yes, they probably would have lost the position, but it wouldn't have been 6 or so seconds behind. But I felt once they didn't stop, they should have just kept Lewis out for as long as possible, almost let Max get right up to the back of him and then stopped, because then you've got the advantage and you're saying, right, game on, Red Bull, let's do it this way. And it would have been even more intriguing. The reason they didn't stop straight after Verstappen, though, is because they didn't think they could make the tyres last. Toto Wolff said this after the race. Their data said, no, you won't be able to last if you do it this way. So I don't think you can criticise Mercedes this time. I think it would be very, very harsh. But I do have a question for Ian, because I really want to know what his favourite car of the weekend was. Because if he doesn't say it was the Chevrolet Nascar, there is something wrong with his ears. That car sounded beautiful on my laptop. What was it like in real life?
It sounded beautiful, but I'm going to disappoint you, mate. It's ugly. I cannot stand it. It's a box. It's a box on wheels.
Even when it's doing donuts with a grinning Australian at the wheel.
I'm not a NASCAR fan. I never have been. I never will be. I just don't like that style of car. Sorry. Yeah, it sounded great. Don't get me wrong. I was there when I heard Daniel fire it up. Didn't get it right the first time round. He was on the second attempt, but he managed to fire it up. But once he did fire it up, yes, it did sound really good. And when it was going around the track, yes, it sounded really good, but not for me, guys. I'm so sorry.
As soon as it came into vision, that's when the problems started for you.
Yeah. I don't mind the colour. I didn't mind the paint job. I'll cope with that because I like blue cars. But no, it's a box.
I mean, it's stock car. It's a stocky looking car. I think we could all say about that car that Danny Ricciardo had a little spin around in. Even though he was told no donuts, he still decided to do as many donuts as he could. I mean, he was beaming all weekend, almost as much as Max Verstappen was at the end of it. Danny Ricciardo seemed to just absolutely relish being in the United States. He obviously goes in with all the kind of cowboy paraphernalia and everything that comes in Austin, Texas as well. But it's a very relaxed Daniel Ricciardo when he gets to these sorts of race weekends. And you can tell he's just enjoying being out there and enjoying the atmosphere. And it pays off in his driving, you feel.
I mean, we know Daniel carries a smile from ear to ear throughout his life. But there's just something Cheshire Cat-like when he gets into Texas, isn't there? He just absolutely loves the place. I think he's definitely going to make this his second home from now on. And it's part of why, he's one of the most popular characters in F1 as well. The fan survey highlighted that, just how popular Daniel is, because he puts himself out there. He does something different. He was the guy on top of the driver's parade truck wearing a Texas Longhorns American football shirt. Everybody else was in their race suits. Come on, guys. This is Texas. This is America. Do something different. Embrace it. And that's what Daniel does. And that's what I think we're going to finally see a bit more of as well now with this Netflix effect kicking in. We're going to see drivers, their personalities hopefully coming out a bbit more. And that's going to allow the American public to embrace Formula One even more as we go into next season, when we've got not one, but two races in the United States, with, of course, Miami kicking in, and what an event that should be as well. But from everything I heard over the weekend, the suggestion is the Miami event will be another level compared to Austin. And if that's the case, wow, are we going to be in for an amazing time over there. Looking forward to that one immensely. I think everybody in Formula One is, I have to say. Let's hope, though, the circuit lives up to it, because that's the one thing we know that we need, is a good race to go with the event. Because if you don't have the circuit, then you're struggling a little bit. The venue can be as brilliant as it possibly can, but without the actual racing on the track, then we struggle.
Just what you were saying there about Danny Ricciardo embracing the whole atmosphere and the whole American sort of culture, if you will. I mean, I really want F1 and the tyre suppliers to get into it and really go, let's get those Stetsons back. We had the hats in Russia as well. MotoGP still do Stetsons when they go to COTA or any race in America. Why is there a reason why we stopped doing that? Because as far as I can see, it just added to it, and I wanted one of those Stetsons. I've got some of the caps. I want the Stetson now.
Are you wanting spurs on the heels of the driver's boots as well as they get into the car? Just scratching the paint job a little bit as they dive in.
Just give us the sound effect of the clink as they get in, maybe.
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit of a clip-clop coming out of the engines as well, rather than the roar of an F1.
Oh, you don't want that?
No. They've already changed the sound of Formula One enough. We don't want to dial it down anymore. I like the idea, though, of the supercars on South Beach. in Miami next year. I have to say that's going to be, and the Tommy Bahama t-shirts. And you imagine like the liveries that are potentially going to come out of a kind of floral effect on maybe one of the Ferraris or something like that. I don't know. Thinking too far ahead. Talking of Ferrari though, let's talk about the battle that McLaren and Ferrari had this weekend. Sam, a very good weekend for Charles Leclerc, that with everything that went on with the top three, there was a danger of that almost going under the radar. But Charles put in a wonderful weekend on Saturday and Sunday's race too, able to come around in fourth for Ferrari. And they're really fighting back against McLaren after what happened in Monza. They're really pulling them back in.
To be honest, it wasn't just the top three distracting from Charles, it was the three behind him as well, or the four behind him, with Ricciardo, Bottas. Bottas had a quiet one coming in sixth, but Sainz and Norris as well. I mean, they were all going great guns and going hammer and tong at each other. But yeah, Leclerc was a weird one. He was 10 seconds off of Perez, and then he was about 20 seconds clear of Ricciardo. So, I mean, no man's land is the best way to describe his afternoon, but he didn't put a foot wrong. We didn't see him. I mean, that shows how much or how little he did wrong. Just plugging away, getting the points in for Ferrari. And I think it's 1.5 points now that Ferrari and McLaren are separated by. So, I mean, it's 3 points, Ian.
3.5.
3.5 points. I mean, sign language is brilliant. You'll see that if you're watching this on the YouTube. We're learning. But yes, no, it's. I mean, we're all looking at this championship fight at the top, but for me, equally exciting is this battle for third again. I mean, it's as tight as we could want, and it's two teams that are just evocative in F1, isn't it? McLaren and Ferrari. Imagine if they were fighting Mercedes and Red Bull next year for the championship.
You're getting greedy again, Sam. You're getting greedy with this.
I mean, we're having won the best even Stefano Domenicali, F1 CEO, said this is one of the greatest championships of recent years, and it just is, isn't it? I mean, we're being spoiled this year, but typical us, we as fans, we want more. We always want more. We're never satisfied.
But Ferrari no longer as popular as they once were, though, rather. They, if that fan survey is anything to go by, what was the most popular team has plummeted down the rankings. What were they, fourth now?
Yeah, they dropped a few places, but it's mainly because McLaren's drivers, isn't it? McLaren with Lando Norris second most popular and Danny Ricciardo the fourth most popular. So, I mean, you've got certain audiences there.
It's crazy because we always think Ferrari are F1 and F1 is Ferrari. Even without winning something for so long, you still always think that they go hand in hand in marriage. And yet they're not even in the top three of the most popular teams now. I mean, wow. That proves what success does to you. Just picking up on Leclerc quickly, if I can. He sort of goes under the radar a little bit when we talk about how good Lando's been, how good George has been. Obviously, Lewis and Max up top. Leclerc's arguably been one of the... Well, I would make an argument of him being the best driver of the last few years. But definitely in the top three. If you think about what he did in that Ferrari last year, that was absolutely nowhere. Putting it on podiums, qualifying fourth and fifth all the time. He's got pole positions this year. He's constantly up there, fighting way above level. And consistently overachieving in that car for me. I cannot wait to see what he's like if there is a bit more of an equal playing field next year with the new cars. I can't wait to see what Charles can do, because I think we have bigged up all the other youngsters, if you like, without really mentioning too much about Charles. And actually, I think he's possibly one of the better ones.
I have to agree. I think that race yesterday, as you say, Sam, it was anonymous, but that token meant that it was an absolutely cracking race from him. Great drive in qualifying, great drive on Sunday as well. And as Ewan said there, I don't think we just can't wait to see what's going to happen next season, obviously. But, if he's in the Ferrari, you got Max in the Red Bull, you got George in Mercedes as well. And then you got Lando in McLaren. Yeah, that could just be epic. Again, it's us wanting more, as we always do, and why not? We should want more, because you hit a level, you then got to go to another level, and that's the level we want to see. We want to see, not so long it's been intra-team. Now we've finally got that team-to-team driver battle between Red Bull, Mercedes, Max and Lewis. Now we want 3 teams involved, 3 drivers. We want 4 teams, 4 drivers. Let's really have just an epic season next year. Fingers crossed.
But one driver I do just want to give a very quick shout out to is Yuki Tsunoda. We've been down on him so much this week, and quite rightly so, because he has had, other than his debut race, a shocking season. It's not been good. And Mick Schumacher as a rookie has completely outshadowed him. But this weekend, to finish 9th and to qualify in the top 10 as well, and not far off of Gasly, that's a good performance from him. And I won't give him more than that as a shout out, because he should have been doing this all year.
Started on soft as well.
I did. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a good performance from him, but this needs to be the start of something that he builds for the rest of the season and carries into the new era next year. So hopefully this is the start, and AlphaTauri can fight with 2 drivers next year.
He wasn't making friends with Red Bull at one point, though, this weekend, when Max was stuck behind him and Lewis got the gap from 8 seconds to 4.5 seconds when Raikkonen and Yuki Tsunoda were holding up Max. Yeah, he didn't make too many friends at the higher-ups at Red Bull, for sure. And wasn't it kind of nice as well for Haas, for Mick Schumacher to play perhaps one of the most pivotal roles in this weekend's Grand Prix at their home Grand Prix? Yeah, he was a backmarker, but Ewan, he was in the thick of it right at the end, and that's probably all Gunther Steiner wants at this point in this season.
And as Mick rightly said, he can't just disappear. Where's he meant to go with that part of the track? He got out of the way as soon as was physically possible, and actually he gave Max the DRS, which ultimately probably allowed him to hang on to that 1 second advantage to keep Hamilton at bay. So it sort of equaled itself out in the end. But rightly said, Haas, home Grand Prix, such a big crowd, the only US-owned team in F1 for the moment, maybe. Wahaha. Good for Haas. And Mick has been pretty on it the last few races as well. And it shows how much of a step they've taken. Mick was disappointed on Saturday with his qualifying performance, that he didn't at least give it a chance to get through to Q2. And that's in completely dry conditions, no gimmicky weather or people dropping out of Q1 because they're not running. The guys who are taking engine penalties were fighting each other to see who could start the furthest up. So there was no, we're taking an engine penalty, so we're not performing in qualifying. So that shows how far Mick's come. And for Haas, I think that is really promising, that if they can sort out next year's car, having switched development so early, if Mick is on it from round 1, and if Nikita can find something in the last few races as well, then they could challenge for a few points next year.
Just finally, we don't normally look ahead, but because we've got a triple header, we probably should look ahead to these 2 tracks coming up in Mexico and Brazil. And Ian, come on, are you not taking the trip? Are you not ditching the bourbon and replacing it with a margarita down in Mexico next weekend? Just taking the quick flight over the border?
I'm not doing the next 2. I'll be in Qatar, but I'm not doing the next 2.
Oh, outrageous! It's a little jaunt across the border, as I say. It'd be so easy to do, but the altitude of Mexico and the heavily favoured track for Red Bull, everybody's saying going into this coming weekend's action, and both of these tracks seem to favour the Red Bulls in everybody's expectation. But Red Bull have done it in Mercedes' backyard, particularly this weekend. There's going to be an impetus for Mercedes to fight fire with fire on a track that's favouring Christian Horner's team. Do you think they're actually going to be able to do it, particularly with all, as we've discussed already, potential engine penalties again for the Mercedes teams that are running Mercedes engines? There's something not quite right there still at the last bit of the season. That's a big problem going into these next 2 races.
I think Mercedes are going to be seriously worried going into this next one. This is a proper Red Bull track. Max won there in 2017. He won in 2018. He put it on pole in 2019 and arguably should have won there, but of course he had a tangle with Lewis at the first corner in Mexico, and then he had a tyre puncture on lap 4 after another collision with Bottas as he was trying to fight his way back from that first corner collision with Lewis. So he should have had 3 in a row going into this one in many respects. I just can't see Mercedes finding that's something that they need out of their dodgy, quote unquote, power unit that they've clearly been having issues with for a few Grand Prix now, as we've seen. I think they're going to get blown away, Mercedes, at that one. I really do. Yes, because at the end of the day, Lewis is hanging on in there, Mercedes are hanging on in there, and they still lead the Constructors' Championship, remarkably. But Red Bull has just been so much the better car throughout the course of the season, in fairness. And I think we are going to see just how good that car is at altitude in Mexico, which we know, as we've just been talking about, is one of Red Bull's favourite circuits.
My concern is that if Mercedes fit a new engine, just the engine, not the rest of the power unit, as we know they've said the rest is fine, but if they fit a new engine to Lewis Hamilton's car in Mexico, we saw Valtteri had to take a new engine in 2 consecutive races because it couldn't last. It was done. It was spent after one race. So at extremely high altitude, the highest they'll race at all year, by some considerable margin, that puts the biggest stresses on the engine. If Mercedes put a new engine in Lewis's car, is it going to last even that one race distance, or are they potentially going to have to then take a 6th at Brazil? I mean, they lasted so far into the season with everything looking relatively fine. So it's kind of a little bit confusing where everything's gone wrong for Mercedes with regard to their engines. But I do think the next 2 races have got Max written all over them. And at that point, Mercedes could be going, how do we do this? Is it possible to rein him in?
And if you have a look at how hard it was for Bottas to get through at the start of the race on Sunday, then even if Hamilton's engine does reach the end of Mexico, if they have to take that change, he's going to have to fight his way through. And at that point, the gap in the championship's extending. Brazil isn't exactly low altitude, so will they have to take another change there? Then that's another heap of points gone. Then we're almost talking as if he's fighting for the championship to stay in the championship at the race after that. So, absolutely pivotal next 2 races.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the title potentially being won in Saudi Arabia here, penultimate race of the season, the way things are going. But who knows? It's been one of those twisty, turny seasons where we've said this is going to happen and it hasn't, that's going to happen and it hasn't, because things have flipped around over the course of a weekend. Let's hope we're going to get some major surprises over these next 2 Grand Prix.
And the last thing on Mexico as well, what on earth do Red Bull do if Perez continues his form and he's leading and Verstappen second?
Are they going to deny him the victory?
Do they swap it? Do you know what I mean? Because that's a massive call.
There'll be a riot, surely. There'll be a riot if they...
Not being in the position where I have to make that call, you just objectively go, you make that call. But good luck getting out of that circuit if you make that call.
Well, it will be interesting if Sergio continues his push and Red Bull looking to pounce and continue to extend Max Verstappen's lead in the Drivers' Championship, now at 12 points at the moment. Gentlemen, we will be back next week after the Mexico Grand Prix, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all then. But a big thanks for joining us here, and safe travels, Ian, on your way back to us here in the UK. Nobody's bitter, twisted or jealous at all that you got to experience.
I can tell. Can't you just tell?
And just something that Sam said as well. You can really feel just in every single broadcast that anybody's putting out that everybody is just relishing this title fight and this season that we finally got after so many years of Mercedes dominance. And I think I speak for everybody when I say I do hope it does go down to that final race of the season. In the meantime, you can check out where Ian, Sam and Ewan do all of their hard graft on GP Fans, and of course get onto the Twitter and Instagram accounts at GP Fans Global to follow all of the latest updates, news and views from around the world of Formula One. Get onto anchor.fm, our host for the podcast, and any good podcasting outlet. And of course, rate and review the podcast and give us a subscribe there. It's all gone wrong right at the end, just like Mercedes here this season. And of course, hit the subscribe link down below here on the YouTube channel to stay up to date with everything that we do in terms of our video content. And we will be back in about 7 days' time talking all things the Mexican Grand Prix.
It's not 7 days' time, mate.
In about 14 days' time.
Oh, bugger.
That's why I was saying not this week, it's next week.
Yeah,
Ian signals again.
He wasn't just going for a picture going, please.
True.
Oh, got it all wrong. Apologies.